In a remote corner of the Tibetan Plateau surrounded by some of the world's tallest mountains and deepest gorges, China is planning the world's most complicated super dam, and it's the biggest hydroelectric project. The dam could give China enough clean electricity to power the UK for an entire year, but the ideal location is one of the most inaccessible gorges in Tibet. A project this size could change the geopolitical power balance across South Asia if the earthquakes don't get in the way, that is. Hey, I'm Regis, and for this special episode we dive really deep into China's insane plan to build the world's most powerful dams in China. Damn, China loves engineering. For the past 70 years they've broken records in almost every industry, building more and bigger than most of the competition, and hydropower is no exception. China currently has about 87,000 dams according to some reports. That's because with a population of 1.4 billion people, water management is crucial. Not only that, but they've redirected many of their major rivers in an attempt to supercharge development. We've actually got a whole other video on that insane project, so we won't get into it here, but suffice it to say that China is no stranger to hydro mega projects. But compared to what they're working on now, everything else pales in comparison, even the Three Gorges Dam. And there have been some crazy plans to realize this project. In one of the original ways they said that they were going to do it was to use a nuclear weapon to blow up that dam. Someone suggested that. Thank goodness the Chinese government were like, nah, we're not doing that. So it's kind of like this thing where it's the most amazing potential for hydro power on the planet, but it's really tricky to extract that power. This is Dr. Ruth Gamble, an expert on the environmental, cultural, and climate history of Tibet, the Himalayas, and Asia as a whole. She helped us a lot in our research to uncover more details about China's mega dam. Hi, my name is Ruth Gamble. I'm a senior lecturer at La Trobe University in Melbourne, Australia, and I've been writing an environmental history of the Alongzango River, which is the upper rates of the Brahma POA. And this river is where China is planning to develop a 60-watt super dam capable of producing 3 times as much electricity as the biggest dam in the world today. If completed, this project would harness the natural power of one of the biggest rivers in Asia and produce enough clean electricity for tens of millions of people. Pulling it off would be an engineering triumph even for China, and not just because of its size. The dam is supposed to be built here in a remote and wild part of China that few foreigners ever visit. The mountainous area is prone to natural disasters, and even getting the construction materials up there would be something worth celebrating. China's neighbors India and Bangladesh share the same river that China wants to build on, and they're worried that a project of this size might seriously affect their access to water, particularly in light of climate change and increasingly unpredictable water flow. With all this to think about, it's crazy that China is even considering this, to be honest. Before we look at how they might actually pull it off, let's try and understand why. Basically, China needs a lot of electricity, twice as much as the USA and 8 times as much as Russia. At the moment, the majority of Chinese electricity is generated by burning coal, but that's pretty much the dirtiest way to do it possible. Coal prod produces way more emissions than the alternatives, especially HYDR power. So as China moves towards net zero and their demand for electricity keeps rising, the idea is to use more renewable sources of energy to produce electricity. As a result, China is investing in everything from solar panels and wind turbines to tidal power and hydroelectric dams. In fact, since the 1950s China has built tens of thousands of dams, including the biggest and most powerful hydroelectric facility in the world, the Three Gorges Dam. And now, after damming most of their internal rivers, China has turned their attention to their major international rivers, and there are a lot. That's because China basically controls most of the water in Asia, and all because of this, the Tibetan Plateau. With an average altitude of over 4,500 m, it towers above Asia and covers an area 5 times larger than France. This insane altitude means that it's filled with glacier and ice, so much so that it's nicknamed the Earth's third pole. And as all that ice melts, it forms many of the biggest and most important rivers in the region. Rivers like the Indus, the Ganges, the Mekong, and the Yarong Tango. In fact, the plateau provides so much water for the region that it's also known as the Water Tower of Asia. So there was this idea that this one mountain in western Tibet was the center of the universe, and then the 4 rivers flowed out from it. So these rivers aren't just a place where people live, they're also the sites of the largest agricultural regions in all the countries they go through, whether it's Pakistan, India, Southeast Asia, or China. Right, so if you think about the food bowls of China, India, Pakistan, Southeast Asia are all along these rivers. If you're going to be an alien that invaded Earth, you'd want to take over control of the Tibetan Plateau cause you'd be in charge of all of the water of half the world's population really fast. Okay, so these rivers are definitely very important, and to China they could provide not only an enormous source of renewable energy but geopolitical power over their downstream neighbors. We'll come back to that later, but for now, let's take a look at the exact river that China's targeting. This is the Yilong-Tango. Depending on which country it's flowing through, it's also known as the Sayang and the Brahmaputra, and thanks to the insane amount of white water and waterfalls it contains, many call it the Everest of rivers. To keep things simple though, we'll just stick with the Yilong-Tango. It starts here at the Anji Glacier and flows over 1,000 kilometers east until it reaches Namcha Baram Mountain. From there it turns south and runs into Enga and Bangladesh before finally emptying into the Indian Ocean. This river is incredible, it's the highest major river in the world, and at almost 3,000 kilometers long it's also one of the longest. As far as we know, no one has ever traveled its entire length, and it's easy to see why. This area of Med is where they're going to build the dam. It is right next to the Indian border, and it's really isolated. It took ages even for the British to figure out where the river actually flowed through that region. It's one of the most isolated places. The exact location that China is targeting for the dam is here. It's called the Yilong-Tango Gorge, a sacred place in Tibetan culture which is even said to contain a hidden entrance to the spirit world. You have different ethnic groups living within the gorge. At the north you have the Tibetans, and at the south you have the Adi people, and then in between you have the Bopa, a different group. And the Tibetans have this idea that a goddess's head rests on the Tibetan plateau and her body curves around the river's bends and her feet end up on the Assamese plains. So they consider that entire stretch of the river to be not just a sacred site but an embodied goddess. However, China is not interested in this place because of its spiritual significance, but rather because of its unique geography which makes it the perfect location for a massive HYDR power megaproject. That's because the river descends rapidly as it passes through the gorge here. As it curves around the 7.7 kilometers tall Nawa mountain in a huge arc known as the Great Bend, it drops more than 2,000 m in altitude. For comparison, the Grand Canyon is only 1,857 m at its deepest point, making the Yilong-Tango Gorge 3 times deeper from riverbed to mountain peak. So this is one of the steepest descents of a river on the planet, probably the steepest descent. The river begins at over 3,000 m and within 100 kilometers it has descended to 600 m. Right, so one of the steepest descents on the planet. It's a giant natural wonder buried deep in one of the most remote and inaccessible parts of the world, and since it's so hard to get there, scientists are still discovering new species in this region every year. They're still finding new mammals that no one's ever seen before through camera traps in this region. I mean, that's extraordinary in 2024 to find new mammals, right? So it's an amazing place biologically as well. So they have to figure out a way to extract the hydropower power without trashing the biodiversity, and this is where China is planning to build their super dam. Sound crazy? Well, it really is.